Looks like a fun neighborhood, doesn't it? Way more fun than my neighborhood, like Uptown Funk or something. For the last 2.5 years, we've all been living through a pandemic. We know about that. For about maybe the last 1.5 years, those of us who lead organizations have been living through another challenge, sort of related to the pandemic. It's been called the turnover tsunami. Has anyone heard of it, the turnover tsunami? And Tracy Dunn, who's on staff, has been informing me about it. She helps us with HR. Turnover tsunami, maybe not that phrase, but if you don't know that one, how about the Great Resignation? Have you heard something about that? Yeah, here's what the gist of that is. If you're an organizational leader, you know it. You've been fearing it. Starting in 2020, there was a prediction that was made that in 2021, that year alone, 52% of workers were going to be looking to change jobs. This is terrifying if you run an organization, that 52% of your workforce could be looking for a new job and you could experience turnover. Catastrophic, destructive for organizations. But arguably, this was a good thing for workers. There was a lot of opportunity in the labor market. That meant that for workers, although employers didn't like this, workers, they could look for more money, more flexibility in work schedule, remote work, more freedom, more life balance, a new adventure in case they were bored in what they were doing. It was going to be bad for employers, great for workers, so we thought. But things did not turn out the way that we expected. First of all, I don't think 52% of the workforce turned over. That didn't happen. They looked, but not everyone went. But here's the reality, that of those who did get a new job, 42% of them now want their old jobs back. Now, you optimists are like, yeah, but 58% are happy. But 42%, that's a lot of people experiencing regret about a job change. And it makes me wonder, why do we do this to ourselves in life? I think all of us, I know this is true for me, from a young age I was taught a phrase, the grass is not always greener on the other side, right? So why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we assume that there's going to be something better out there? Or maybe more important, why is it that we expect our work to add so much to our lives? Why do we allow our jobs to mean so much to us in the first place? If you think about it, when it comes to our jobs, we expect a lot. We expect income, which makes sense. That's what jobs are for, to help us pay for the things of life, to have a life that we like, to provide for our families, that kind of stuff. That's what jobs are for. But beyond that, we go way beyond that. We expect our jobs to define us. We let them define us. We say, I am a pastor. I am a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a teacher, I'm an administrative assistant, right? I do, I am. We let our jobs define us. Not only do they define us, but they determine our worth. We all know this. There's a hierarchy of jobs out there. If you have this kind of job, then you're a more worthy person. And if you have a lower job, then maybe that's not as attractive, or it doesn't say as much about you. In the last few years, there's been a lot of a movement to try to elevate the value of stay-at-home moms, which I think is definitely worthy work. And it's very admirable work, and it is way undervalued. Sometimes I wonder, though, instead of elevating that work, maybe we should be deflating the value of other work. Maybe our work shouldn't give us that much value. Maybe we shouldn't be looking for our work to determine our worth. Or finally, we look to our jobs to give our lives meaning. And this is also a dangerous one. There's an ancient word. The English translation of it is vocation. Have you heard that before? Vocation. Vocation literally means calling. Calling, you can hear invoke, voce, voice, calling. And so there's this word vocation, which means, what is my calling? What am I here to do? What has God called me to do? What is my purpose? What is my meaning for being here on this planet? We don't use the word vocation much anymore, if at all, but when we do, when we use the word vocation, what are we usually talking about? Our jobs. Now, your job was never meant to do all of these things. Your job is primarily meant to do the first thing. It's meant to give you a paycheck, to give you income so that you can make a living. And yet we've allowed our jobs to try to do all of these things. We put all of these expectations on our jobs. And so it's no wonder that 42% of the workforce are still unsatisfied. Maybe it's not the job's problem. Maybe it's our expectation of what our jobs are supposed to do that is the problem. Now, I know some of you are thinking, but wait a minute, okay, I get it. All right, so jobs are just for income, but isn't it nice if your job can also check those other boxes for you? Like, is there anything wrong with that? Wouldn't that be a good thing if your job can also do those things for you? Isn't that a bonus? And to that I say, maybe, but it can also be pretty destructive. See, when we let our jobs become too much, we put too many expectations on them. We look to them to define us and give us identity and worth and meaning. When we do too much, then here's what happens. When you lose your job or you retire from your job, then what does that mean? Does that mean you've lost your purpose, your meaning, your calling? Have you retired from a life of meaning when you retire from your job? Or what about this? In moments where you hate your job, and all of us have moments where we hate our jobs, does that mean you hate your calling? Here's the thing. Your job is not your calling. And that's good news. Because the reality is you can't hate your calling. You can't. Your calling is actually something that gives you energy and joy and purpose. Your calling is what gets you out of bed every morning. You may not have a job, but you still have a calling, and your calling, you can't hate it. It's actually something that gives you energy. It animates your life. Not only that, but you can't lose your calling. Say that again. You cannot lose your calling. You can lose a job, you can get fired from a job, you can retire from a job, you cannot have a job right now. You cannot lose your calling. Romans 11 says, the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. And for those of us who are a little less fancy, the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. They cannot be taken back. God will not take them back. He will not remove them. See, my own grandparents, none of them had jobs that were enviable by any human standard. They didn't look to their jobs for much. They needed jobs to pay the bills, but they lived meaningful lives anyway. They knew not to confuse their job with their calling. And that's what I just want to blow this apart today as we move forward in the message, because we've allowed our job to become our calling. We figured these things have to be aligned. And I'm saying today, I don't think so. I don't think so. We're going to get this right today. Now, I know this is an unpopular opinion, and smarter people say otherwise, and that's fine. They can say it. I think I have the Bible. I think I have the Bible on my side today. At least I'm going to try to make a case from Luke chapter 10. In Luke chapter 10, starting at verse 25, we're going to see Jesus tell a story. The story is called the story of the Good Samaritan. Story of the Good Samaritan. Anyone heard of that before? At least have heard that phrase, Good Samaritan? You're a Good Samaritan? Come on, more of you have heard it than that. Wake up, people. There we go. Yeah, a lot of us have heard that. Maybe you even know the story. I've taught on this multiple times. I've heard it taught on multiple times. And everybody acts like this is a really simple, easy story. I think there's a lot to this story, as I'll show you in a minute. We're going to look at it now. So on one occasion, an expert in the law, so this is a religious lawyer, a legal expert, but in a religious sense. So a religious lawyer, which I know sounds like an oxymoron. I feel so bad for you lawyers here. Like, you get it all the time, don't you? Like, you come to church and you're getting harassed for what you do for a living. Your pastors, questioning your religion because you're a lawyer. I'm sorry that you have to deal with that in life. I'm sorry that I just did that to you. You will just have to console yourself with your giant paycheck. So on one occasion, a religious lawyer stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus answered him, what is written in the law? How do you read it? I mean, you're the expert, right? You're the lawyer. You study the law. You tell me. And the religious lawyer answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. He's really summarizing a passage from Deuteronomy, a passage from Leviticus. There are 613 laws in the Old Testament, then a bunch of man-made laws added on top of them. So this is a pretty insightful summary, pretty bold to summarize it in this way. Jesus answers him after he gives a summary, "You've answered correctly. Do this and you will live." So question and answer should be done, but it's not. He goes a step further. The religious lawyer wanted to justify himself. And so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" From loving God, loving my neighbor, who's my neighbor? In reply, Jesus starts into the story of the Good Samaritan. Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, they beat him, and they went away, leaving him half dead. So a priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite." This is also another religious profession. So this is, Jesus here is inventing the priest, a rabbi, and a cowboy walk into a bar. Those jokes, I think this is where they start. So too a Levite, it's in the text, I don't know what to tell you. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, pass by on the other side. But then a Samaritan, and I'll just tell you really quickly, a Samaritan, these were distant relatives of the Hebrew people, but they were despised relatives. During a part of Israel's history, they kind of got intermarried and they got all this weird religion mixed in. So they were infidels in the faith. They were foreigners. They were not trusted people. Jews did not like Samaritans. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. That was the medicine in those days. Didn't have Bactine or antiseptic wipes, none of that. Then he put the man on his own donkey, ancient ambulance here, brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. So a denarius is a day's wage, and so he's paying for a couple of days of keep for this innkeeper. Now, last night, I'll just tell you, do you guys ever see things that are not there in life? Let's just be honest, you do, right? See things out of the corner of your eye, they're not really there. Or sometimes when you read something, do you see something that's not actually there, but you swear it's there? Anybody? Please tell me someone else does this, because last night I lost my mind. I was reading this and I kept saying 200 denarii, and I swear the 100 was in there, and I was like, that's a lot of money. And I made a whole point about it, and it's not there. So I don't know. I'm just reporting on health things to you guys. You can keep me accountable. So the next day he took out 2 denarii, 2 days' wages, gave them to the innkeeper. Not only that, he said, "But when I return, I will reimburse you. I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." So the story ends, and Jesus looks back at this lawyer and he says, "Which of these 3, priest, Levite, Samaritan, do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" And the expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Interesting answer. The one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." So again, the story of the Good Samaritan. It's so clear. It's so obvious. What does it mean? I don't know. I have a lot of questions, actually. Some of the questions I have when I look at this is one of the first questions is this a parable or is this a real story? Not that it matters. Jesus tells parables that are made up stories that have a point. He's definitely telling this story to convey a deeper point, but it doesn't exactly sound like a parable. He doesn't say the kingdom of heaven is like, or he's talking about a real road and real places. And it makes me wonder, was this a news story of the day? Was this something everyone was talking about? How that guy got beaten on the road and, hide your kids, hide your wife, like this is a bad place and be careful. And it doesn't really matter, but I do wonder, is this a true story or is this a parable? I also wonder, what is the legal expert, the lawyer, really after? It says he's trying to test Jesus. Is he trying to trap Jesus? Or is he just curious about Jesus, wondering if Jesus actually is faithful? Does he know what he's talking about? Does he know the law? I wonder about that. I wonder about this one. I feel like there's something significant in the fact that the legal expert comes to Jesus and he says, the question for him is, okay, who is my neighbor? That's his follow-up question. Who is my neighbor? But when Jesus is done with the whole story, he turns the question around a little bit, and he asks this instead: who was a neighbor to the man in need? Notice that, right? The guy says, who is my neighbor? As I go through the world, who is my neighbor? And Jesus instead turns the perspective from the guy asking the question to the man in need, and he says, who was a neighbor to the man? I think there's something there. I don't know what, but I think it's interesting. The other question I have is, what does it mean to go and do likewise? Which one of these was a neighbor to the man in need? The one who had mercy on him. It feels like the guy couldn't even bring himself to say the Samaritan. Like he couldn't own up to that. But the one who had mercy, go and do likewise. What does that mean? Does that mean as I move through my day that I have to stop and help every person I encounter who is in need? If it does, that seems impractical to me. Anybody else? I feel like I cannot get through my day if I'm expected to stop and help everyone in need. Anyone else? Okay. I guess I hang out with way more needy people than the rest of you. It just seems impractical. I don't know how you're supposed to live life if this is what you're supposed to do every day. Not only that, I'm not sure this is healthy. Is it healthy to live your life on alert, like running to meet the needs of every person around you? Is that healthy? Is that a healthy way to live? I'll tell you, my therapist this week said no, so I'm going to take his counsel on that. I'm not sure that it's healthy. So I've got all of these questions from this simple story that's supposed to be so clear, I'm not sure what it means. And here's the thing, today I'm not answering any of these. That's why you have 3 teaching pastors. Go bark up another tree. Talk to Doug or AJ if you want answers to these questions. Maybe they'll give you some as we go through the series. Here's what I want to wrestle with today. I think there's also something here. The religious lawyer comes and he says, what must I do to inherit eternal life? That's his question. And in Jesus' first answer to him, he says, do this and you will live. And I want to tease this out a little bit because I think there's something important here for us. See, this religious lawyer, he comes with a question that a lot of us have. The question is, what must I do? What are the requirements, the obligations, what are the boxes I have to check in order to someday have eternal life, to get into heaven someday? Or we might say it, what must I do to be saved? What must I do to get past, St. Peter, who's supposed to be the bouncer of heaven's gates? Like, what do I have to do? What do I have to prove? What do I have to show to be able to have life someday? It seems like he's talking about life someday in the future after life is over. But look at Jesus' answer. This is how Jesus answers: do this and you will live. See, it seems to me that Jesus is pointing to something not someday, but it really feels like in this answer, Jesus is pointing to something now. He's not saying, hey, if you do these things right, then you'll get to be able to be admitted into heaven someday. It really sounds to me like Jesus is saying, hey, you want to talk about life? Let's talk about life now. What does it take to live now? See, this is what we believe here at Pathfinder, that God is inviting us into a relationship with himself through his son, Jesus. And the purpose of that relationship is to give us life starting now. God wants us to live now. And yes, the life that we live now before we go on to eternity, it will still be an imperfect life. It will be peppered with trial and difficulty and suffering and pain and loss. That is the way of this world, but it will still be a richer or fuller life than any other way that we can live on this earth. God is offering us an opportunity to live, not someday, but now. And so if you're hearing me today, if you're here today and you're someone who's tired of existing, but you want to live now, if heaven seems way too far away and you want more life now, then I'm inviting you to reorient your life around getting to know and trust the person of Jesus. Because he will show you not just how to get to heaven someday, he will show you how to begin to live, to truly come alive. Now, that's what the lawyer's missing. He's talking about someday, and Jesus goes, let's talk about now. And here's the amazing thing about all of this. The good news is that Jesus is not far from any one of you. In fact, every moment of your life, he's been pursuing you with his love and goodness. Every good thing that has ever happened to you, he was the cause of it, whether you've noticed it, whether you know it, whether you believe it or not. But today you can begin to start noticing. You can reorient your life to noticing him. He's present right now in your life, and he's working out good, and he's holding out life for you. Today you can call out to him because he's been calling your name since before you ever were. He wants to help you live now. See, here at Pathfinder, we call that the whole life. I'll talk more about this at the end of service. Jesus wants to help you live financially and live mentally and live physically and live relationally and live spiritually and live more fully vocationally. This is what life is about. This is what life can be, not someday, but now. And today, I've already talked about this. I want to zoom in on this one, vocational life. What Jesus is talking about here in the Good Samaritan is that we can have a fuller life when we understand that our vocation, our calling is not our job. It's bigger than that. And whenever we make our job into our vocation, we make them one and the same, we're reducing the abundance of our life. See, here's the real gift that Jesus gives us to the Good Samaritan. A richer life is not found in your next job opportunity. Maybe a richer paycheck, and that can be important. That can be found in your next job opportunity. But if you're expecting that next job to fulfill you, you just saw 42% of Americans are going, that didn't do it. And the 58%, I don't trust them. I think they're still looking in the wrong place for that. See, if you want to find true, abundant life in your vocational life, then it means you've got to accept your true calling, whatever your job is. And here's your true calling. We got it from the scriptures today. It's to love the Lord your God and to love your neighbor as yourself. To love the Lord and to love your neighbor. That's your calling. And here's what's amazing about this. It doesn't matter what your job is, does it? You can do this at any job. You can do this while staying at home or being unemployed or being retired or being so busy in your days. You can love the Lord and you can love your neighbor no matter what you do. Not only that, you can take into account your unique gifts and abilities and your passions. All of those things, they do matter in life. And you can try to figure out a job and how to move through life so you can put those things to work. But however you decide to do that, whatever your gifts and passions and skills are, you can still do this. Whatever it is, you can see your days as an opportunity to love God and to love your neighbor. And when you do, Jesus says, when you make that your highest calling, then you will live. So how do we know when we're getting this wrong? How do we know when we're getting confused? Because there's some overlap here. How do we know that we've started to make our job into our calling rather than letting our calling inform our job? How do we know when we're getting that wrong? Well, as we talked about, one of the ways that we know we are getting it wrong is we start to put too many expectations for happiness on our work. Right? Yeah, a miserable job can make you miserable. But when we start to put too many expectations on our job to fulfill us and define us and give us worth and value and to give us meaning, then we know we're getting this wrong. And if you're changing jobs and you keep looking and you're still not happy, it's not the problem with the job. The problem is you've allowed your calling to become your job, and those things are not the same. How else do we know when we're getting this wrong, when we're getting this mixed up? When we start to say a certain phrase that makes me crazy. Me, Dion, personally, it makes me crazy. Do you have phrases like that, things that people say that just make you crazy? They like make your skin crawl and make your blood boil, and you're like, don't say that around me. Maybe your kids' friends come over and they say something, and your kids are like, no, don't say that here. Don't say that here. Like my dad will get mad. He hates that. Don't say that around my dad, right? Anyone have a phrase like that? Gets under your skin? Anybody? Anyone want to volunteer what that might be? Anybody? I heard someone. Did I? Come on, no one's going to volunteer? When another person fulfills me? Oh, to make your skin crawl? Yeah, you're like, that's not their job to fulfill you, right? You're like, that's for someone else. Yeah, you want to know what someone else that was back there said theirs?
Here's the thing.
Here's the thing? Great, I probably said that a dozen times today already. You're free to find another church. Here's mine. It's not my job. Ooh, when people say that, get mad. It's not my job. Like maybe your kids might say this when you tell them to unload the dishwasher. It's not my job. You're like, oh, really? It's also not my job to pay your car insurance and your cell phone bill, is it? You want to go, right? By the way, that's a complete hypothetical. My kids have never said that. I've never, just making stuff up. Or workplace cultures where this is the prevailing attitude, the sentiment, like, oh, what's in my job? That's not in my job. Where you put that bullet, other duties as required for people who are really legalistic. Like, is that technically my job? Let me tell you, if your organization, if the team you lead uses phrases like this, you need to change their language now or close the business. It's never going to work out with this kind of attitude. It's not my job. We've all been to restaurants where this is the prevailing attitude and we don't go back. And we know it's the prevailing attitude because you're sitting there and you're hungry and your food isn't ready and you can see it there in the window under the heat lamps. And you also see a bunch of workers standing around and you're like, will someone please just, hand me my food or bring it to my table? It's right there, somebody, and no one's doing it. Why? Because you're not their customer. It's not their table. In other words, it's not my job. Or we've all been on hold, the third person we've talked to, fourth person we've talked to at the call center, and you tell them your whole problem again, and they go, I'm so sorry, Mr. Garrett, I'm gonna have to transfer you to yet another department. When they have power, they can do something. They work for the right organization. Help me. But what are they saying? They're saying, it's not my job. It makes me crazy. Now, do you notice today in our story of the Good Samaritan, these two guys, a priest and a Levite, they walk by this man who's been beaten and left for dead. And this is not a busy road. This is not an interstate where 10,000 cars an hour are passing and, hey, someone else will see it. This is a pretty lonely place. They might be, as far as they know, the only people walking the road that day. And this guy is half dead. And they walk by him. Not only do they walk by him, but they see him and they're like, ooh. They walk by on the other side of the road. Why? Because they were guys with big, important jobs. They had other things to do. Priests and Levites, they're really important people. Not only that, to mess with this man who's been beaten and is bloody, they could defile themselves. They could make themselves ceremonially unclean. They could make themselves unable to work. They'd be in quarantine for 10 days or so. My job's way too important. People need me. I can't take time. I can't help this guy. Do you see the big thought bubble over their head as they walk by and they're like, oh, okay, I can't help this guy. Do you know what they're thinking as they ignore this man in need? They're thinking, it's not my job. It's not my job. Now, what about us? How do we know when our calling and our job are getting confused? I've told you a couple of ways. We start saying things like, it's not my job. We start to look for satisfaction that our jobs can't give us. We start to see other things too. We start to see that we start ignoring our calling to our families. Or we pull into the neighborhood at the end of the day and we see a neighbor on the sidewalk and we do the quickest wave possible and we get into the garage and close the door before anyone can start a conversation. We stop making time for worship, whether it's on a weekend or our daily time with God. We're too busy. We've got so many important things. We're too busy to serve because we're so busy. And certainly if we're going to serve, it's got to be a high-capacity serving role. I'm not going to hold babies in the nursery because that's way beneath me. I'm so much more sophisticated than that. I don't have time for that because I've got a very demanding job and I've got to be very strategic about how I use, right? Come on, this is stuff I say. This is stuff you say. And when we do that, what is in our thought bubble? I mean, we're saying all the stuff, but what's really going on in our head, what's operating? It's not my job. As if your job is all you're here for. Now, I'm not here trying to guilt you, honestly. I'm here to diagnose you. Because this is also part of the reason why you're lonely and your relationships are unfulfilling. This is why you're tired and your health is in the toilet. This is why your spiritual life is all dried up. This is why you're anxious and your mind is racing. Because you've confused your job with your calling. And Jesus says when we do that, when we get that wrong, we're not really living. Do this and you will live, Jesus says. See, if we can begin to rethink what we're on this earth to do, and yes, we have jobs, and yes, that may be part of how we live out our calling, but if we can see our highest calling as what we learned today, to love God and to love our neighbors, here's the promise. Here's the promise. Then we will live. Somehow, when we embrace this calling that God has put on us to love him and to love our neighbors, then we start to live. Life gets fuller, life gets richer, life gets better, life gets more abundant. It doesn't seem like it, does it? But it's true. Jesus says it's true. Do this and you'll live. Not someday in heaven. It's not part of the checklist that you have to do to get into heaven. Jesus says, you want to live, you want a fuller life? Make room for this. Understand what you're here on this earth to actually do. Do this and you will live. Now, before I close, and I want to close with this, I actually have to back way up. Because today I've been talking about this calling to love God and to love your neighbor, and that's what this series is built on, and we're going to talk more about it as we go. But there's actually a calling that's even higher than that one. There's a calling that's even higher than the thing we saw today. To love God and to love your neighbor. There's something that you're called for that's even higher than that. And here's the crazy thing, it's not even anything you're called to do. It's someone you're called to be. So you want to truly live? Stop living for doing. Instead, start living out of who you've been called to be. That's where life starts. I've shared this with you before. God's greatest question isn't, are you good? Right? And we think this all the time, that God is rating our performance. He's scoring our job abilities, our cognitive abilities, our spiritual abilities. He's giving us a ranking. He's giving us a grade. He's making a list. He's checking it twice. And he's looking at us to go, are you good enough? Are you going to make the cut? And that's all about doing. But before God cares about our doing, and today he told us to do something. He said, love me and love your neighbor. There's stuff to do. Before that, more important than that, that's not God's greatest concern. God's greatest question isn't, are you good, but are you mine? Before you're called to do anything, you're called to be his. Your highest calling is to be loved. It's to be treasured. Your highest calling is to belong to the family of God, to be his. And it's not until you get that right, until you understand that that's your highest calling. It's not anything to do, it's who you are. You're called to be God's. It's not until then that you'll be able to do the second calling. So you can't love God and you can't love your neighbor until you know that you are loved. And you can't live a life of purpose and meaning until you know that whether you live your purpose or meaning well or not, an A student, an F student in the game of life, doesn't matter. You belong. See, when we embrace this first calling to be, especially just to be loved as we are, then we're able to move through life differently. Not hustling to try to prove that we're good or we're worthy or we matter or that our life matters. We're not on the hook for that anymore. That's already been given and it can't be taken away. But when we have it, then we can move through the world truly loving God and loving the people around us, the people who are closer than you think, the people who are just under your roof or maybe right around the corner. See, that's your calling. Let's pray. God in heaven, some of us are fighting this right now because it's so foreign. It's not how the world works. We've been living decades under a different sense of what it means to live and to have purpose and to live a life that matters. So God, I pray that you begin to untangle all of that and speak over every person here today. Speak over every one of us. A simple declaration that we belong to you. God, right now I pray that everyone in this place would hear you saying, you are mine. I love you as you are. You are chosen, not forsaken. I am for you, I am not against you. Doesn't matter how well you're doing at life right now, you're mine. I claim you. My call is irrevocable. I won't change that. God, speak that over us today so that we can rest in that first calling and we can be energized for the second calling to simply live life loving you and loving the people that you've put around us. But God, it starts with you speaking a better word over us, affirming us of who we are to you. So speak that over us today, God. Speak it over us as we sleep tonight. Speak it over us as we go through the week, this week. Every day, remind us, just speak over us anew every day that we are yours, we are loved, we belong, and that's a gift that we don't have to strive for. Pray this in your name. Amen.
Wow, what a powerful worship experience. I know I'm excited to be a bigger difference maker in my neighborhood and to see what God is going to do with that. Thanks for joining us and being a part of our online Pathfinder neighborhood today. And if you're new, you can find helpful links and resources in the description down below or at pathfinderstl.org. While you're there, you can also find our message podcast to allow you to listen to the weekend message while you're out on the go. So if you're out jogging around, driving, whatever you're up to, you'll never miss out on a chance to tune in. So I encourage you to like the video, to share, to comment. God's blessings to you, and we'll catch you next time.